I wanted to die. Stop, girl, you know it's girl, you know it's girl. 80,000 people, girl, you know it's girl. I couldn't repeat it 15 times. Girl, you got obvious. So I stopped, I panicked, I ran off stage. Julie Brown, who used to work for MTV, ran after me. I didn't want to go back to the stage. I had enough. 80,000 people waiting. I said, I have enough. I quit.
This performance was the beginning of the end for Milli Vanilli. But in this video, we're going to take it back to the beginning of the beginning and spread the blame to where it belongs with their producer, Frank Farian. Welcome back to the Ty Said What Ty Said channel. We are back to old school gossip today, and we're going to get into the truth about the creation and destruction of late 80s hit music duo Milli Vanilli, one of the biggest scandals in pop music history. But before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Amanda Sills and Nay West because they are the first winners of my LOL Premier Comment Award. They won that prize for posting the funniest comments during the premieres for my videos called Jermaine Jackson's Dirty Cheating History with Women and the time Paula Abdul got beat down by Jackie Jackson's wife for being his side chick. The prize is $5 to your money service account of choice, Cash App, Zelle, or PayPal. And you can win the same prize during this premiere or any of my video premieres. Also, YouTube hooked me up with that applaud button at the bottom of your screens, so if you don't like what I say but you love it, feel free to hit that button and send your girl Ty some cash. Now, on to why you are here. Let's get into this Milli Vanilli story and expose the real fraud, hit producer Frank Farian. Frank Farian started as a trained cook before moving into the music industry. In April 1967, he released Will You Ever Be Mine under the name Frankie Farian, but it wasn't a success. In the early days of his career, he was hopeful to make it as a solo artist, but no one was listening to Frank Farian until they didn't know that they were listening to Frank Farian. His song, Baby Do You Wanna Bump, was his first big musical success, but it was released under the pseudonym Boney M, so listeners didn't know that Frank Farian had anything to do with the track. He hired performers to front for public performances. The lead vocals for songs on Boney M albums in the 1970s were sung by Farian, but Boney M's frontman was Bobby Farrell. I've read more than a few articles that state that Bobby Farrell was only allowed to record vocals in the 1980s, but seeing as he got fired from the group in 1981, that's really not saying much. And is it just me, or does he bear even a slight resemblance, a teeny tiny resemblance to Fab Morvan of Milli Vanilli? Please answer that question in the comments, but I will say that one difference between Bobby Farrell and the frontman for Milli Vanilli was that Bobby did sing in live performances even though he didn't record in the studio. Bobby Farrell would lip sync, or as some sources read, mime, the male vocals on Boney M's hit records when the group was out performing to a track. Bobby Farrell was more of a dancer and showman than he was a singer. He was known for his extravagant costumes, and he was often outfitted for the stage with a bare torso and tight-fitting bell-bottom pants. Boney M had their first hit with Daddy Cool in 1976 and scored a UK #1 2 years later with Rivers of Babylon. The song sold nearly 2 million records in Britain alone, where it stayed at the top of the charts for 5 weeks. So it seems that Frank Farian's idea was pretty much to do a copy and paste of what had been successful in the UK and Europe, hoping to have a similar type of success in the USA. So he formed Milli Vanilli in a similar fashion, but he underestimated a few things. One, just how huge of a success Milli Vanilli would become, and just how seriously the American media and press would take the news when they learned that Fab and Rob were not the actual singers, and honestly, how unnecessarily brutal they would be. Now we get on to the creation of Milli Vanilli. The fact is that the group was built around a song that was already a hit. That song is Girl You Know It's True. The Milli Vanilli version was released in 1988. The original version was released in 1987. It was by a group called Newmarks, and a lot of Baltimore area people knew the song pretty well. The original Newmarks version was not a big hit in the USA, but it was doing well across the Atlantic, in Germany in particular, and that's where Frank Farian heard it and thought to himself, I can make this an even bigger hit. Just for your own reference, you should check out the song right here on YouTube, Girl You Know It's True by Newmarks, Numarx. What you will hear is a song that sounds almost exactly like the one that you already know by Milli Vanilli. Not much at all was changed. The original almost sounds like it could have been a demo for the Milli Vanilli recording. So, while Frank was in a German disco hearing Girl You Know It's True by Newmarks, the wheels of his brain started turning. He made the decision to recreate a new version of the song, just adding a bit of Euro dance to the hip-hop beat. First, he started recruiting singers in 1988. Linda and Jody Rocco, two American sisters, sang backup, and Charles Shaw, an Army soldier from Houston, Texas, rapped on the track. Charles Shaw told Billboard, quote, "When he played the record for me, I already knew the song. I had been dancing to the Newmarks version on the weekends in American Clubs in Hamburg. Farian played it and I said, 'This song ain't new,'" unquote. Charles Shaw also said that Farian admitted that it wasn't a new song, but he still went with it and just started mixing voices. Frank Farian eventually added the voices of Brad Howell and John Davis for vocals. These were the men whose voices we thought belonged to Rob and Fab, the younger, attractive faces we saw. Frank Farian knew the importance of image better than anyone, and when he met Fab and Rob in early 1988, he knew that he had found the last piece to his money-making puzzle. They were young and attractive, so that fit the bill for the image Frank Farian wanted to display. And they were hungry for success, which made them easy marks for Frank. Rob was the son of a Black American soldier and white German woman. He was born in New York City, but spent the first years of his life in a Bavarian orphanage. Rob was adopted when he was 4 years old. He grew up in Munich, and there he dealt with racism and isolation. Music and breakdancing helped him to find his identity. When he met Fab, he found someone with similar interests and life experiences, and someone who, despite the language barrier, could identify with him. Fab was also reared in Europe, but in Paris. His parents were from the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. Rob told the Los Angeles Times that he felt like something clicked between the two young men because both grew up in foreign cities that didn't have a lot of Black people. They both danced and modeled, but really wanted to make music. Enter Frank Farian with their opportunity to do just that. Well, kind of. Frank Farian invited Rob and Fab to his studio and signed them to a record deal. At the point that Rob and Fab met Frank Farian, they were poor. They were living in a housing project in Munich. Poor to the point where they were stealing food to survive. But did they really know what they had signed up for? According to Fab, he and Rob walked into a trap, not knowing it was a trap. In his version of events, he and Rob signed the contract without realizing they were being hired purely to lip sync. Rob may have known better than Fab just what was in the contract, as the contract was written in German. Fab did not speak German or read German, and it's quite obvious that these two men did not have enough money to hire legal counsel to review or negotiate this contract. Fab spoke French, and Rob spoke German. They were both able to speak a little English, and that is how they would communicate with each other. So it's safe to assume that Fab certainly had trouble understanding the contract. But it stands to reason that Rob would have had trouble too, even though he spoke German. Understanding legal terms and fine print would have been a struggle to understand himself, and furthermore, convey to Fab in the broken English that they could speak to each other. I mean, think about it. We know of too many music artists who grew up speaking English and got screwed over on their first and sometimes second music contracts written in English. They wanted to sing, and the first time Frank Farian played Girl You Know It's True for them, he played the track as an instrumental only, leaving Rob and Fab to think that they would go in and record the vocals. Sounds like a reasonable thing for someone to think who had just signed a recording contract, right? But little did they know, Farian had already recorded the vocals with the vocalist who would sing on the track and stay on the track, and he never intended to record vocals with Fab and Rob. According to the actual vocalist who recorded for Milli Vanilli, Frank Farian was running a weird studio operation, calling in Rob and Fab to come and hang out in the studio, but making sure that they never came in contact with backup vocalists or the rapper, and calling the actual singers to only come and record after midnight when no one else but the sound engineer was present. By the time they learned the truth, which was that they would never record in the studio, Fab said they had already spent Frank Farian's advance money on new wardrobes and their trademark braided hair extensions. They were ready to walk away, but now they couldn't because they were in debt to Frank. They did not have the money to pay back his advance, so they had to stay. Once the group took off, which was almost right away, girls and money came into the picture, and so did drugs. And that definitely made it even harder for Rob and Fab to break away from the man who had made them and the devil who had tricked them. For everything that he knew about show business, and it was a lot, Frank Farian had no idea how big the Milli Vanilli craze was going to get. He told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "It was a crazy idea. I thought, okay, it's just for discotheques and clubs," end quote. But his mixing in Eurodance with hip-hop, R&B, and pop was exactly what that time in music was calling for, and Milli Vanilli quickly became the music success that he would need to end to save his own self. Girl You Know It's True went #1 in Germany, and that got Milli Vanilli a deal with Arista Records in the United States, and there is no doubt that their music videos played a huge part in skyrocketing their songs straight to the top of the charts. Those two good-looking guys, and their clothes, and their dance moves, and their braids were constantly on MTV. Within a very short time, Milli Vanilli had 5 top 5 hits on the Billboard Hot 100. That included 3 #1 singles: Baby Don't Forget My Number, Girl I'm Gonna Miss You, and Blame It on the Rain. All of those singles were on the Girl You Know It's True album. That album went 6 times platinum in America and sold millions of more copies worldwide. They were everywhere. And that meant more press, more camera time, more interviews, and with that, more suspicions started to come. Fab Morvan told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "Every time we gave an interview, the reporters would hear my French accent or Rob's German accent, and they'd say, 'No way, how could these guys have sung the songs?'" They even had dialect specialists brought in, paid for by Arista Records, who said they had no clue that these men were lip syncing. The dialect specialists were brought in to try to help the situation, but fast fame didn't make it easy. They would have needed more time to make this a smooth, unnoticeable transition. Now, I will admit that my teenage self never once thought that because of their accents that they weren't singing those songs. As a matter of fact, I remember asking my dad when I was much younger why a lot of British musicians didn't sound British in their music or sing British. Learning that Phil Collins was English, for instance, really blew my mind. Why didn't he sound like, "You know I love you, but I just can't take this. You know I love you, but I'm playing for keeps. although I need you, I'm not gonna make this. You know I want to, but I'm in too deep. Exactly. So Milli Vanilli made total sense to me. But nevertheless, Rob said, we didn't want to do any more interviews. The more we talked, the worse things got. Their former Arista product manager, Robert Weiger, also spoke with Billboard about the accent situation. He said, quote, I remember there were some words Fab couldn't pronounce. He had a pretty thick French Guadeloupean accent, so on Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You, he couldn't say miss, and he said meese. But listen, you all, keep in mind that by the time that everything unfolded with Milli Vanilli, we are supposed to believe that the record label was tricked by Rob and Fab. Regardless of all that, at first, the fans were in love with them. Milli Vanilli did an appearance in Los Angeles where they were swarmed around so heavily that LAPD cops were brought in to hold all of the girls back. It's not surprising. They had the looks and charming personalities to go along with those looks. Their rise to superstardom was quick, and their fall from it happened just as fast. While they were enjoying fame and everything that came along with it, Rob and Fab were struggling to live with their secret, and in a very short while, they wouldn't be able to any longer. On July 21st, 1989, the group's backing track malfunctioned and started skipping during a Club MTV tour stop in Bristol, Connecticut. They were performing to Girl You Know It's True. Girl you know it's, girl you know it's, girl you know it's, repeated over and over and over. Rob panicked and ran off stage. The particular incident in and of itself had no immediate effect on their career, but this is the moment that Rob would later call the beginning of the end. And it's worth noting that a similar track malfunction happened on the same tour when they were in Milwaukee. It sent Rob and Fab running off the stage this time. Downtown Julie Brown gave a quick pep talk and assured that the fans just wanted a performance, which was true. This was during a time when the biggest names in pop music were also giving their fans a ton of choreography. Think Janet Jackson, Paula Abdul, Madonna, New Kids on the Block, and any other singer who performed with that headset mic. It was very common to have a backup track to a high-energy dance performance. Anyway, Julie Brown got through to them and they got back on stage and finished the show. But again, the beginning of the end is where we are in this story. But they would still climb a couple more notches before the big fall. In January of 1990, they won 3 American Music Awards. Then later in the same award season, they won the award that every music artist wants, a Grammy. Theirs was for Best New Artist. They beat out Tone Loc, Nena Cherry, Soul to Soul, and the Indigo Girls to get that win. Knowing that their time was running out, Rob and Fab finally turned against Frank Farian, demanding to sing on their next album. Rob told him, "You don't let us sing on the album. Don't do this anymore. We don't want to live like this." When Frank saw that they weren't letting up, he felt as though he had no choice but to call a press conference and tell the truth. At least his version of the facts, which made himself and the label, Arista, seem almost blameless, and made Rob and Fab out to be the villains who had tricked everyone. Just days after Frank Farian's press conference, and days before Fab and Rob's own press conference, Rob told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "We sold our souls to the devil. We lied to our families and our friends. We let down our fans. We realized exactly what we did to achieve our success. We made some very big mistakes, and we apologize," unquote. Frank Farian, on the other hand, was unapologetic about the whole scam. His answer to it? In 1991, he released The Moment of Truth, a new studio album credited to what he called the real Milli Vanilli, meaning the singers from the first album. Arista, meanwhile, claimed no prior knowledge of the deception, though Rob and Fab insisted that the label knew exactly what was going on. And I believe them. I can't really recall what my teenage self believed when all of this was going on and unraveling in 1990, and I didn't keep up with the details. More than anything, I just remember being surprised. But in 2020, as an adult, I believe Fab and Rob because it just makes sense, and I can't help but wonder why it didn't make sense to more adults in 1990. Speaking of 1990, that is also the year that we would be introduced to the house and Eurodance groups C&C Music Factory and Black Box. Both of these groups got caught doing pretty much exactly the same thing as Milli Vanilli, but the fallout was nowhere near as great for them. Now, I wonder why. Maybe it was because they didn't have the same amount of success as Milli Vanilli. That's the only thing that I can imagine, but both groups still did quite well. What do you think was the reason for that? Please answer that in the comments section. Now, in 1990, when it seemed like everyone was willing to accept Frank Farian's story, I can say that collectively, maybe we just didn't know any better. But let's look at this now, in the year 2020, with 2020 vision, knowing the things that we know or can learn because of Google, seeing behind the scenes stuff on social media, and just being a little more sophisticated in our knowledge of how some things can go in the entertainment industry. Let's ask ourselves, does it seem likely that two poor young men would have been able to dupe their producers, everyone in management, at every venue where they performed, and their record label? We would have to believe that somehow they were able to set up their own sound equipment for every performance, hand off a CD to a DJ or a sound tech and say, play this for me. And above all, somehow get around recording vocals in a music studio for their own producer. And at the time that they were signed to Arista Records, Clive Davis was the president. He is the same man who had the general public thinking that his cash cow, Whitney Houston, was a polished princess and knew the importance of hiding her actual crass character, and was able to do so successfully for over a decade. Well, of course, he would be the perfect partner to team up with Frank Farian to help uphold his facade that was Milli Vanilli, especially if the money was right. And the money was definitely right. Another quote from their former Arista product manager from that same Billboard interview I quoted earlier, he said, "Their egos were so big because they were such big stars that they were like, we can sing, no problem." They became believers in their own false story. Now, if this is how he truly felt, is that not a clear indication that the label knew what was going on? But no, we believe that these two total newcomers to the entertainment industry were able to pull off this elaborate scheme that would not have only fooled their worldwide audience, which would have been hard enough, but that they also fooled Frank Farian and Clive Davis, two industry veterans. Rob and Fab would have needed a lot of money to make that trip work. They didn't have that kind of money, but I imagine that the people they worked for did. A few days after Frank Farian's press conference, Rob and Fab called their own press conference. They were accompanied by a voice coach who assured the audience that they could indeed sing. Rob and Fab even gave back their Grammys, which they planned on doing even before the Recording Academy formally revoked the awards. And in that moment, they were quite gracious and humble, saying that they felt that the singers who recorded those songs deserved those Grammys. Rob also said that they were seduced, abused, and felt guilty. Nobody cared. Arista dropped them from the label and deleted their entire song catalog. Former fans were now demanding refunds and even threatening to sue for fraud. And even though they had already given back their Grammy was revoked. This would be the first time, and so far has been the only time, that a Grammy has been revoked in the entire history of the award. Rob and Fab suffered a devastating fallout, while everyone who had been around them, pulling the strings and reaping the real monetary gains, moved on virtually without consequences. Rob, whose birth mother was a white German woman and whose biological father was a Black American Army soldier, had already been abandoned by those two people who brought him into the world. Now, his adopted family turned their backs on him too, asking him to change his name. Rob and Fab released a self-titled comeback album in 1993 and even appeared on the Arsenio Hall show to sing For Real in front of a national audience. Arsenio Hall might have been the only adult who believed Rob and Fab when the scandal was happening, and he genuinely wanted them to have a new start. On that episode, they talked about how all of the friends who had been around them when all was well had totally checked out only 3 weeks after the scandal broke. The phones just stopped ringing and all they had was each other. But unfortunately, the album ended up being a flop. And from there, both Rob and Fab began a battle with drug addiction. Thankfully, Fab eventually sobered up, but that would not be the story for Rob. Fab says that Rob, quote, didn't do well with humiliation. Being punched every day in the public eye leaves marks. The only way he could deal with it for him was the addiction, unquote. And so, Rob sank and spiraled out of control. In 1991, he had to be talked down from a 9th-story balcony by police. In 1996, he served jail time for breaking into a vehicle and physically assaulting 2 people. And, unfortunately, on April 2nd, 1998, Rob Pilates died of a drug overdose from a fatal mix of pills and alcohol in a German hotel room in Frankfurt. He was only 33 years old. May he rest in peace. As hard to believe as it sounds, at the time of his death, Rob had apparently been working with Frank Farian again. Considering that Farian once claimed that Rob was never going to be a proper recording artist because he had, quote, never heard such a bad singer in a black, unquote, it was particularly surprising and disturbing for me to find that at the end of Rob's life, this is the person with whom he spent so much time and that he trusted him at all. Upon hearing the news of Rob's death, Farian told The Independent, "I'm totally shocked. Rob looked really good again. He was full of optimism for the future. We intended to tape material for another album." Now, this is just me talking. I have to say that I hate knowing that Farian was one of the last people around Rob. And because of his snakish ways, I can't help but wonder if he had something to do with Rob's death. But if I just have to take what I can find to read about this situation at face value, then I have to wonder, was fame the ultimate high for Rob? Because I just find it so hard to believe and understand why he would go back to a man who played such a big role in his downfall just years before. Regardless of his thought process, may he rest in peace. God knows that he deserves to, because it didn't seem like he experienced much peace on this earth. Now, in doing the research for this video, I came across more than one possible way that Milli Vanilli got its name. Some publicity material claimed that it was a Turkish phrase for positive energy. Milli means national in Turkish, but Vanilli doesn't mean anything in Turkish. Another source says that Milli Vanilli was named after one of Frank Farian's girlfriends. Yet another source says that Milli Vanilli was named after a shut-down discotheque in Berlin. Still, another source says that the name was partially inspired by the English pop group Scritti Politti. But I will choose to believe what Fab said he wants the name to mean after he heard the news of Rob's passing. He said, "When I heard the news of Rob's death, everything went blank at that moment. Silence. It was like losing a part of myself. In order to honor him and for myself, I set a vow that I would do my thing, and I would make sure that the name Milli Vanilli itself means when you fall, you stand back up and you move on. And from everything that I can see, he has done just that, stood back up and moved on. After Rob's death, Fab started doing a lot of motivational speaking, using his own story as an example of how one can thrive after adversity. He also started DJing on the radio. He learned how to play guitar and piano, and that's something that he was kind enough to let me know when I asked him about it on Twitter, because all of the research that I found just said that he learned how to play an instrument. So I do thank him for responding and letting me know that. And he also became a session musician, songwriter, and producer. Now, no one could call him a fraud. In 2003, he released his first solo album called Love Revolution that included an acoustic tribute to Rob called It's Your Life. This album didn't even do a tenth of what Milli Vanilli did in sales, but none of that stuff mattered anymore. Fab found his voice in more ways than one, and it was out for people to hear. That was success. Fab performs his new music. He even performs the Milli Vanilli songs that we know and love. And in a move that was a display of coming full circle with his start in the music industry, Fab collaborated with John Davis, one of the actual recording artists whose voice he once lip-synced to, for a project called Face Meets Voice, a Milli Vanilli experience. Fab Morvan is a man who has made peace with his own legacy. In 2018, he was being interviewed by the Associated Press. He took a moment to defend his and Rob's contributions to pop culture some 2 decades earlier, and rightfully so. He said, "People might say, well, they didn't sing on the record. But look at the rest. We were the heart and soul of Milli Vanilli. We did those 107 cities on tour in 8 months. We worked hard. We worked our butts off. We entertained people." And I can only agree with that. For me, Milli Vanilli, without the dancing, the music videos, the concerts, the visuals, the 2 men with the braided hair, would not have captured our attention the way that the whole package did. And those 2 men, who were ridiculed and reduced to being called dancers and pantomimers, they were the biggest part of what Milli Vanilli was. In 2018, Fab told the BBC that performing those Milli Vanilli songs now, in the present, is a way to keep Rob with him, and to free those memories from a place of negativity into a place of joy. And I must say, that joy is what I see on the faces of the audience when they are singing along to his solo performance of Girl You Know It's True these days. And looking at Fab, who appears to have only aged about 5 months since the 30-year-old scandal, on the stage, rapping every word and singing every note of Girl You Know It's True, in my mind, this is what redemption looks like, and he deserves that. I only wish that Rob could have been here to share it with him, because he deserved it too. Well, that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Ty Said What Ty Said channel. Please leave a thumbs up and a comment so that we can get a discussion going. And share on all of your social media, especially your Facebook. That really helps me out a lot. And subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you know when my next video is ready for you. See you on the next video.